Tonight, we're not riding into saloons or shootouts, but into something far more unsettling. We're stepping into the world of frontier medicine, where Wild West doctors stitched more nightmares than they ever healed. They came with leather bags, tired eyes, and just enough boldness to be dangerous. They weren't trained. They were guessed, blessed, or just desperate enough to try. This isn't a story of healing. It's a story of pain, of bones set with fence posts, bullets dug out with spoons, fevers misdiagnosed, remedies worse than the disease. These doctors learned their craft in wagons, barns, and barrooms, if they learned it at all. But in the Wild West, having a knife and an opinion was enough to be called a professional. So, if you like your history foggy, strange, and softly horrifying, settle in. Let the blanket pull closer. Let your hands fall still. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Take a breath. Let the dust settle, because tonight we walk into the sick room, and the doctor is already waiting. Let's begin. The man with the bone saw. They called him Doc Henry, but nobody knew his real name. He came in a wagon that smelled like feed in spring and corpses in summer. No lanterns, no curtains, just a cot, a crate of brown bottles, and one leather roll packed with tools stiff from dried blood. Inside that roll was a bone saw. Not new, not clean, but sharp and slick from lard he smeared on with his sleeve. He stank of tobacco, iron, and something so sour it made your eyes sting if he leaned too close. He didn't heal with hope. He healed with habit, didn't ask questions, just looked. Tilted his head, said things like, "We'll see what's left," or, "It'll have to come off." His hands were steady, never gentle. No gloves, no one used them. Sterile fields weren't a thing yet. Tools were dipped in whiskey, wiped dry, and jammed back into place. Sometimes he'd rinse his fingers. Most times he didn't. He trusted the body to survive more than the science that might have saved it. A broken leg? He splinted it with cratewood and wrapped it in rope. A bullet? Dug out with horse forceps. A fever? He bled them until the shivering stopped, or everything else did. If a wagon crushed your arm, there were no second opinions. The saw came out, the limb came off, no anesthesia, just a bottle between your teeth and a prayer whispered too late. He wasn't liked, he wasn't trusted, but he was the only option, and that made him gospel. When there was no one else, you called Doc Henry, because when the choices were pain or death, you chose the man with the saw. You wouldn't last a day with him, not because of the blood, but because of the silence. The way he moved like pain was normal, like suffering was a second language, and he was just its quietest translator. You'd watch a man chew through his own rag just to stay conscious, and Doc wouldn't blink, wouldn't flinch. He'd just keep going like this was how the world had always worked. But sometimes, somehow, he saved them, a man who kept his leg, a child who walked again, a woman who lived to hold her baby, delivered by lantern light and lullabies no one believed he remembered. He wasn't mercy, but he wasn't evil either. Just a grim, necessary ghost on the edges of town, moving on before anyone could ask too many questions. The saw is quiet now, the wagon's gone, the tools are resting. And tonight there are no knives, no bottles to bite, no fever dreams to sweat through. You're not broken, you're not bleeding, you survived, and the doctor is gone. Only quiet remains, only rest. The man with the bone saw has passed you by, and you are healing in peace. The Doctor Who believed in leeches. He didn't carry a scalpel, he carried jars, and inside them, nightmares. They said he came from somewhere back east. but the wind had scrubbed the accent from his voice and the road had worn down anything soft in his eyes. His name was Dr. Mortimer Lowell, and he wore a coat stitched for finer cities, brass buttons dulled, velvet cuffs fraying, but still worn like memory mattered. He arrived in a wagon that reeked of damp wood and stale tobacco. No bone saws, no knives, just tall glass jars, clinking, corked, shimmering. And inside each one, leeches. Dozens. Hundreds. Thick and pale as drowned flesh. They were his answer to everything. Coughs, fevers, nightmares, bad luck, grief. If it ached, he bled it. He said the blood needed balance, and the only cure was taking some out. His hands were soft, his voice low, almost kind. He smelled of peppermint and moldy books. But no one met his eyes for long, because it wasn't just the leeches. It was the way he touched them, like they were sacred, like he loved them. He'd prick a patient's skin, just a bead of red, then gently press one of his pets into place. It would wriggle, latch, and start to feed, and he would nod slowly, like the universe had just clicked into rhythm. Children screamed when they saw him coming, even the sick ones. His wagon had little windows, and when the sun hit just right, the jars glowed with black lips and twitching shapes, all of them pressing against the glass, reaching, searching. He said they calmed him. He said they worked better when he sang to them, and if you passed by his tent late at night, you'd hear it. A low, breathless hum, older than language, meant for blood and crawling things. He didn't charge much, sometimes nothing at all. Just asked for trust, for stillness, for time. People gave it, not because they believed in him, but because they'd run out of prayers and poultices, and in the dust-choked quiet of the West, strange started to feel like hope. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the leeches, but because of the silence that followed him. Rooms stopped breathing when he entered. Children stopped crying. The world just paused, as if waiting for something ancient and hungry to pass through. You'd hear the jar unseal, the wet rustle inside, and you'd wonder, is this medicine or madness? And yet, some got better. A mute girl whispered again. A swollen leg walked again. A sleepless woman finally slept. Dark welts beneath her ribs where the leeches had fed. He said it wasn't about healing. It was about reminding the body how to fight. Give the blood a scare, and sometimes it remembers who it belongs to. The other doctors hated him. Called him a charlatan, a swamp witch, a danger. He never argued, just packed up his wagon and rolled west, always a town ahead of the rumors. He kept notes, neat, spidery script, diagrams of leech mouths and human ones, Latin scrawled in the margins like whispered spells. In one journal, someone found a prayer, not to God, but to the blood itself. No one ever saw him cough, or limp, or even sniffle. Some swore he let the leeches feed on him, just a little, to stay balanced, to keep himself in tune with whatever strange rhythm he served. But not everyone survived. A child too weak to bleed. A woman who turned cold after her wounds reopened. A man who swore, night after night, that they were still inside him, crawling. But that was then. Now the jars are sealed. The wagons rolled on. The creatures are dreaming, if they dream at all. You are not beneath a damp cloth. There is no cold weight on your skin. You are not being drained. You are full. You are untouched. Let your blood stay where it belongs. Let no one name it impure. Let your heart slow on its own. Let your breath settle. You are not an experiment. You are not prey. You are human. And you are allowed to keep your blood. Let the leeches dream of someone else. The barber who pulled teeth and sliced flesh. He had a striped pole outside his shop, red and white, the paint flaking in the wind, the stripes faded by too many summers and too much silence. They said the colors came from the old days, when barbers weren't just men who cut hair, but men who cut everything: blood, bone, and abscess. In the Wild West, a barber might give you a shave in the morning and take your tooth by sundown. You didn't question it. You couldn't afford to. Doctors were rare. Surgeons rarer. But a barber, there was always one of those. His name was Amos Finch. Broad hands, scarred wrists, a mouth that never smiled fully. He'd come from somewhere colder, he said, but the sun had melted the patience out of him. He kept his shop neat. Brushes hanging on nails, scissors polished, blades lined in a velvet roll with buckles worn thin by years of use. There was a jar of combs, a bowl of water that hadn't been changed in 2 days, and a wooden chair with leather straps nailed into the arms. Straps that didn't match the rest of the decor. They were old and stained, and used more often than he liked to admit. He could cut your hair in silence, trim your beard while humming something low and off-key. But if you came in with pain, tooth pain mostly, everything changed. He'd pull a stool from the back room, the one with legs that wobbled on the floorboards, and ask if you wanted something to bite. Most did. Leather strap, wooden spoon, a rolled cloth dipped in whiskey. It didn't matter what, only that you bit hard enough not to scream when the metal clamped down. He had a drawer full of tools, not surgical, not precise. Tools that were built to fix shoes, carve meat, split wood, but he used them just the same. A pair of rusted forceps, a hook that looked more like a fish gaff than anything meant for human flesh. And always, he said the same thing before he started. It'll hurt like hell, then it'll be done. And it did, and it was. Blood ran down chins, onto aprons, onto the floor. He'd mop it with rags he never quite got clean. The smell lingered, copper, salt, sweat. It stayed in the room long after the patient staggered out, holding their jaw, eyes blurred with shock. Sometimes he offered a shot of whiskey. Sometimes he didn't bother. It depended on whether he liked you. He wasn't cruel, just practical. If you flinched, he stopped. If you begged, he waited. But he never turned anyone away. A swollen gum, a jawbone cracking from infection, he'd seen it all. He'd press a hand to your cheek and say, "You waited too long." But he'd still do the job. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the gore, but because of the noise, the sound of the forceps slipping, the sound of the root tearing, the gurgled cry that came even through the biting rag. You'd hear it once and never forget it. You'd see the way his hands didn't shake, not out of confidence, but because they'd stopped caring. You'd smell the blood and the hair tonic, mingled like perfume, and want to run. Still, people thanked him. A man who could sleep again for the first time in weeks. A woman whose face stopped swelling after 3 days in bed with a compress. A child who cried for a moment and then smiled, gap-toothed, as if the world had come back into focus. He shaved heads for surgery, lanced boils, cut away dead flesh from wounds that festered too long. He boiled his blades sometimes. Other times he just wiped them on his apron. He wasn't a doctor. He didn't claim to be. But he knew the body, knew how to open it, how to empty it, how to patch it. And most of the time it worked. He never married. No one asked why. But people noticed he whistled when he worked. Only during the worst parts. As if to keep himself anchored, as if to keep something darker from climbing into the room. The door to the shop is closed. The blade is wrapped in cloth. The stool is empty. Your jaw does not ache. Your gums are not swollen. Your mouth is quiet. You are not bleeding. There is no pain here. No forceps waiting. No rusted drawer. You are not in that chair. You are not the next appointment. You're whole. You are safe. You're not someone else's emergency. And let the barber whistle for someone else, the doctor who thought he could cut out madness. His wagon had curtains, real ones, stitched from velvet, pulled shut at night with little brass hooks that rattled when the wind passed. No one knew how he kept them so clean. Maybe he didn't. Maybe the dirt just respected him enough to keep its distance. His name was Dr. Silas Vane, but most people just called him the Quiet Doctor, because he didn't advertise, didn't hang a sign, didn't clink bottles or cry out for patients in the square. He waited, and somehow they came. He wore gloves, which was strange. Not for blood, but for touch. Soft leather, stitched tight at the wrist. He said they helped him concentrate. That too much contact muddied the diagnosis. He didn't deal in wounds or coughs or broken bones. He dealt in something harder, something more invisible. He called it affliction. Others called it madness. He treated the things people didn't want to admit out loud. The shaking hands, the night screams, the ones who forgot their names, the women who stared too long at nothing, the men who whispered to the walls, mouths dry, eyes far away. He called it sickness of the spirit. Said it started in the soul and spread like a mold, and he believed it could be cut out. He carried a box, walnut wood, polished smooth, filled not with medicines but with strange tools. Small knives, needles too fine to stitch anything flesh could hold. A drill, a tiny hammer. Things that looked more like jewelry-making implements than anything meant for the human mind. But he was convinced the brain held the answer, that if you opened it just right, gently, precisely, you could release whatever haunted it. He never used chloroform, said it dulled the soul. He used opium when he had it, whiskey when he didn't, but mostly nothing. Just a hand on the shoulder, a steady voice, and the promise that the pain would be brief. Sometimes he shaved heads, drew chalk lines across the skull, whispered prayers before he started. He said the prayers weren't religious. They were alignment, as if he was tuning an instrument. He'd place his tools on a cloth, lay the patient on a table barely big enough for their frame, and begin. Not many watched. Those who did often left quickly. Pale, quiet, different somehow. But those who stayed said he was careful, said he hummed while he worked. A low tune that didn't match the rhythm of his hands. And when it was over, when the patient woke, if they woke, he'd be sitting nearby, gloves folded neatly in his lap, eyes soft with something like sorrow. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the operation, but because of the silence around it. The way people nodded when they saw him in town, not out of respect, but out of fear. As if saying too much might bring him nearer. You'd feel the weight of his gaze, the way he measured people without measuring tape. And you'd wonder if he already saw something in you that needed removing. Still, some said he saved lives. A boy who stopped screaming after the rain. A woman who remembered her daughter's name again. A man who stopped waking with blood under his nails. Some said it wasn't the surgery that helped. It was the ritual, the trust, the idea that someone still believed their suffering had a shape, and therefore, a way out. He didn't charge. Not always. He took what he was given. A loaf of bread, a quilt, a place to sleep. And when he left, it was without ceremony. Just a rattle of curtain rings, just the sound of wheels on dry dirt. His wagon bore no name. Only a small brass symbol on the side, 2 circles, one inside the other. No one knew what it meant. Maybe a cell, maybe an eye, maybe the shape of something no one could name. He kept records, wrote not of what he did, but of what he saw. Scribbled in thin, sharp letters across pages that smelled of camphor and wax, descriptions of dreams, lists of words patients repeated. One entry read, "She said she saw her grief hanging like laundry." Another, "He believes his thoughts are made of ash, and that the wind keeps trying to scatter them." The chalk has been washed away. The instruments are folded. The humming has stopped. There is no gloved hand on your brow, no whispering voice asking if you remember your name. You are not on the table. You are not being studied. You are not broken. Let your thoughts drift. Not away, not scattered, just softened. You are not mad. You are not haunted. You are simply tired. And that is not a sickness. The brain is not a battlefield. The soul is not a wound. There is nothing to cut out, nothing to fear. Only rest, only quiet. The Doctor Who swore by Mercury. His hands were stained, not with blood, but with brightness. A strange, silvery sheen that clung to his nails and pooled in the creases of his fingers. Like moonlight trapped under skin, he said it came from healing, from progress, from science so new it hadn't been explained yet. His name was Dr. Hollis Bray, though no one used the title for long. Most folks just called him the Silver Man. Some out of respect, some out of fear. Because what he carried wasn't medicine, it was mercury, and he used it like faith. He came west with a crate full of vials and a confidence built somewhere in Europe, or so he claimed. Said he'd trained under a doctor who had once dined with Darwin. Said he'd seen diseases cured by the ounce, not by the hour. He promised miracles, handed out pamphlets that crinkled like dead leaves, filled with drawings of organs and cursive that looped too tightly to trust. He pitched a tent on the edge of every town, lit a lantern inside, and waited. His patients were the desperate, the last hope kind. The ones who'd already been cut and bled and prayed over until they had nothing left to lose. They came hobbling, coughing, shaking, sweating. He welcomed them all, smiled like a preacher, said the poison inside them could only be cured by a greater poison, his. Mercury came in little bottles with cork stoppers. Clear fluid, bright as frost, heavy as sin. He'd tip it into spoons, onto gauze, into the mouth itself. Sometimes he rubbed it into wounds. Sometimes he whispered as he worked, words in another language, or no language at all. The mercury glittered in the firelight, danced across the skin, slipped into the body like a ghost. People didn't know the danger, not then. They only knew what they felt, the fever breaking, the tremor fading, the pain quieting. For a while. But mercury doesn't cure. It hides. It silences symptoms while digging deeper, eating nerves, blackening teeth, turning hands to claws, and by the time the pain returned, it was different. Slower, stranger, less sharp, but more permanent. They came back. Some angry, some confused, some forgetting why they came at all. Hollis would welcome them again. Smile just the same. Increase the dose, add a paste. Mix it with herbs or vinegar or powdered bark. He called it alchemy, but it was wrought in a prettier bottle. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the mercury, but because of the certainty in his voice, the way he spoke as if doubt itself were a disease. You'd hear him promise healing, and you'd ask what it cost. He'd say, only what you were already losing. And you'd feel the weight of that answer long after you left the tent. Still, some believed. A miner who could use his hands again for a time. A boy whose fever didn't return for 3 full weeks. A woman who walked straighter after a single dose. He gave them time, if not a cure. And to many, time was all that mattered. He never stayed long. Once the symptoms changed, once people started to forget things, or twitch or scream in the night, he packed his bottles, folded his tent, left a chalk circle on the ground where it had stood, and disappeared. Sometimes he returned a year later, under a different name, with new drawings, new promises, the same silver in his hands. The towns remembered, not always in anger, sometimes in awe, because even poison can feel like magic if it works long enough. And some said the tent glowed late at night, like it held stars inside. Others said they saw him drink it once, mercury, from a spoon, eyes closed, mouth soft, and lived. The bottles are closed, the silver has dimmed, the tent is gone. You are not under his care, you are not swallowing anything tonight. There is nothing in your veins that shouldn't be there. Let the poisons pass you by. Let the body be trusted again. Not tricked, not burned, not buried under something too heavy to carry. Your breath is clean. Your blood is yours, your mind untouched. You do not need a miracle. Only time, only stillness, only peace. And let the silver man keep walking, the midwife with no mercy. She wasn't called doctor. She didn't want to be. Said it was a man's word, one that came with letters after your name and gloves that didn't know what pain felt like. Her name was Miriam, though most people called her Widow Black. She'd lost 3 husbands, one to war, one to fever, and one to the sea, or so she said. She never spoke of them, only of the living, and, more often than not, the not yet living, the ones still waiting to enter the world and the women trying not to die while they did. She had no wagon, no office, no sign, just a satchel made of old leather and a voice like iron dragged through smoke. When someone sent for her, she came, no matter the hour, no matter the weather, whether it was a cabin with a dirt floor or a brothel upstairs from a saloon. She came. She wore black, always, and a gray kerchief tied tight around her hair. She didn't ask questions, didn't need names, only said, "How far along?" and "How long have you been hurting?" She'd roll her sleeves, wash her hands in whatever water she could find, and press her palms to the belly like it was a map only she could read. Sometimes she nodded. Sometimes she frowned. Sometimes she just went quiet, and that silence was the most terrifying thing of all. Because Widow Black had one rule: the baby or the mother. If it comes to that, you choose. And you choose before I begin. Most didn't believe her. Not until it came time to decide. She carried no anesthesia, no sedative but whiskey, no soft words, only tools, a curved knife, a spool of horsehair thread, a stick for biting, a long, narrow pair of scissors she kept in a cloth embroidered with crosses, and rags. So many rags, stained and washed and stained again. She had no bedside manner. She barked orders, told husbands to get out, told sisters to shut up, told the dying not to waste time screaming. "Breathe or bleed," she'd say. "You don't get to do both." And somehow, that harshness worked. People listened. Maybe because they knew she'd seen more of death than any preacher in 100 miles. Sometimes she sang, only in the worst moments. A low hum, tuneless, like wind between fence boards. No one knew what song it was. Maybe it wasn't a song at all. Maybe it was mourning in advance, or prayer. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the blood, but because of the waiting, the hours of labor, the moaning that turned to silence, the silence that turned to dread. You'd want to hold her hand, and she'd slap it away. "Don't touch me," she'd say. "Touch the child. It's the one that needs you." Still, she saved them. More than she lost. Even if she never said it out loud, even if she left before sunrise, walking into the fog without a goodbye, even if she didn't come to the christening or the funeral, she was never seen holding a baby, not once. But she brought them into the world, screaming and red and whole, and when a mother didn't make it, when the choice had to be made, she never wept, never flinched, just wrapped the child tight and whispered, You cost something. Make it worth it. People feared her, but they waited for her. When the pain started, someone always rode out to find her. Through snow, through night, through floods and drought. They knew she wouldn't refuse. She never had. And once, when a young girl bled too early, too suddenly, Widow Black stayed by her side for 3 days, fed her broth, braided her hair, never spoke a word about the child that didn't live, just said, "Next time, maybe," and kissed her brow. The labor has passed. The knife is sheathed, the water is clean. There is no breath being measured, no heartbeat in doubt. You are not waiting for her knock. You are not in her hands tonight. Let the pain drift. Let the worry settle. Let the body rest, not as battlefield, but as shelter. You are not split. You are not struggling. You are whole. The birth has already happened, and you are on the other side. And let the widow walk past your door. The doctor who prescribed pain. He was thin. Not the kind of thin that came from hunger, but the kind that came from being sharpened by time. His shoulders narrow, his spine straight, his jaw clenched like a man always halfway through a hard thought. They called him Dr. Reed, though no one could say where he got the title. Some said he'd studied medicine in New Orleans. Others claimed he'd just read every book in a burned-down apothecary and declared himself the survivor of knowledge. What they knew for sure was that he never smiled, never joked, never drank, and believed in pain like other men believed in God. Dr. Reed didn't think pain was something to avoid. He thought it was a tool, a teacher, a path. If you had an illness, he'd poke it with a stick and see what it did. If you had a wound, he'd press on it until your body flinched, and then he'd say, "That's where we begin." He didn't use laudanum, said it dulled the mind, didn't trust opium, called it a liar. He wanted his patients awake, aware, alert to every ache. His treatments were strange. Boiling poultices wrapped in oilskin and pressed to skin until it blistered. Tiny cuts along the spine, bled with cups made from oxhorn. Vinegar and salt rubbed into open wounds. Ice water dumped on the chest of a feverish man, while Reed timed his gasps with a pocket watch that had no hands, just a tick that never stopped. He believed if your body was distracted by a greater pain, the lesser one would recede. A fever would break. A cough would vanish. A madness would unhook its claws. He treated tuberculosis with starvation, treated migraines with fire. A woman came to him with a tremor in her hands. He stitched nettles into her gloves and told her to wear them for a week. When she came back, bloody and shaking, the tremor was gone. And so were the gloves, and most of her kindness. He had rules. Never lie, never flinch, never ask for mercy until the work is done. And somehow people followed him, not out of trust, but out of desperation. He was the man you saw after hope had already left. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the pain itself, but because of the way he demanded it, the way he watched it, the way he never looked away when someone screamed. You'd ask for relief, and he'd ask you what relief had ever taught you. You'd want comfort, and he'd hand you a stone to grip until your fingers bruised. Still, there were those who swore by him. A woman who walked again after he dislocated her hip on purpose. A man who stopped hallucinating after Reed bled him for 6 days and left him alone in a cold cellar. A boy whose seizures vanished after Dr. Reed held his head in freezing water until he stopped crying. Some said it was torture. Others said it was healing. Reed never said. He just nodded, wrote in his ledger, and moved on. No one saw his notes, but if you caught a glimpse, they were precise, tidy. One entry read, "Screamed at 2:14. Silence returned at 2:17. Marked improvement in color." He stayed in towns only a little while. Too many patients left changed, not always better, but never the same. One woman said he took the sickness out, but left the hurt behind. Another said, he made me strong, but I don't know what I lost. He lived alone, no family, no friends, just a canvas tent with iron stakes and a cot that was always cold. Some nights, people said they heard him talking, not to himself, but to the pain, as if it were a person, as if it answered. The tools are packed away. The water is still. The nettles are in the fire. No one is pressing your wounds. No one is measuring your screams. There is no pain to endure tonight, no test to pass, no cure that hurts more than the sickness. Your body is enough. It does not need to be burned or bled or bruised to prove its worth. And let the pain sleep too. The traveling surgeon who never said no. He wore white, or what had once been white. A long coat stained with years of dust, blood, and the kind of grime that no river could rinse away. His boots were cracked, his eyes were hollow. His name was Dr. Ellery Finch, and he carried more knives than a butcher and fewer answers than a priest. He didn't ask what was wrong, he asked where. And he never ever refused a job, not once. You could find him by the sound of his cart. Not a wagon, not really. Just a slab of wood on wheels with handles bolted to the front like a child's sled. Inside, rolled bandages gone yellow with age, glass bottles without labels, a bone saw, a file, a set of clamps, and a half-dozen tools no one could name. It was all lashed down with twine and leather straps, not for safety, but to keep anything from rattling too loud when he walked. He hated noise. He had a lantern, always, hung it from the side of the cart, carried it into homes, barns, fields, lit it even in daylight, said he couldn't work in shadows, and yet he never looked anyone in the eye, not once. He stared at wounds, at the floor, at the spot on the wall where blood had dried, but never at the person. He operated anywhere, on the floor, on a table, on a crate, once, while snow piled against the door. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. If a limb needed to come off, it came off. If something festered inside the belly, he cut. If the bleeding wouldn't stop, he pressed so hard it left bruises in the shape of his fingers. There were no second opinions, no delays, just the lantern swinging, just the blades shining, just the sound of flesh giving way to metal. He rarely spoke. When he did, it was with exactness. This will hurt. Don't move. Hold him. She's gone. His voice was flat, colorless, like it had been scraped clean by too many cries, too many names forgotten on too many lips. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the surgery itself, but because of how fast it came. 1 minute you'd be explaining the pain. The next, your shirt would be cut open. The scalpel already in hand. He didn't wait for fear. He didn't wait for your breath to steady. He acted. Because waiting, he said, was what killed people. Still, he saved lives, more than anyone else. Even his critics admitted that. He knew things others didn't. Where to press, where to cut, how to stop the blood with a stitch that held even through fever, how to find the bullet that others left behind. And though his patients often screamed, they screamed for less time. They survived. Some said he had no heart. Others said he had too much of one and had buried it somewhere inside himself just to keep going. He left town as quietly as he arrived, sometimes in the middle of the night. No payment asked, no thanks accepted. Just a trail of recovery and a few empty chairs. He never stayed to see how people healed. Maybe he didn't want to. Maybe he believed the living didn't need him anymore. Only the dying did, and he'd go, then to the next one, to the barn, the prison, the battlefield, wherever someone was screaming and no one else knew where to start. Once, someone followed him, a boy whose father had lived because of Finch's hands. The boy begged to be trained. "Teach me," he said. "I want to save people too." And Finch looked at him, really looked, for the first time, and said only, "No, you don't." The knives are folded. The blood has dried. The cart has rolled on into the hills. The lantern is just a distant light bobbing gently behind the trees. You are not being held down. You are not about to be cut. You are not a case. You're a person. Whole. Breathing. Safe. Let the wounds remain sealed. Let the quiet remain kind. There are no more surgeries tonight. No needles. No saws. No hands asking you to be still. The surgeon has moved on, and you don't need him anymore. The quack with bottles full of lies. He wore rings on every finger, brass, copper, silver when he could find it, and his voice carried like a preacher's across a dust-blown fairground. His coat flared like a magician's, green velvet gone dull at the elbows, buttons polished to a sheen that caught the sun and held it hostage. They called him Dr. Bellamy, but there wasn't a soul who believed that was his real name. Still, they gathered when he pulled into town, every time, because no one sold hope like he did. His wagon was painted with flowers and gold leaf, words curled across the sides in looping script. Dr. Bellamy's perfected elixir, for pain, for weakness, for melancholy and madness. Below that, as seen in St. Louis, endorsed by leading physicians. There was always music. A fiddle player sometimes, a woman in a red dress who danced until the first bottle was sold. Then she disappeared, always. Bellamy stood on a box with a bottle in hand, held high as if it were a torch. "Tired?" he'd cry. "This will lift you. Lost the color in your cheeks? This will paint them back. Ache in the joints, heaviness in the heart, dreams that won't come when you close your eyes. My elixir cures it all. Cures what ails you and what might ail you next week." It was mostly alcohol, a little opium, a dash of turpentine for bite. Tasted like sugar and regret, but it was cold, and it was smooth, and it made people forget, for a while. Forget the weight in their chest, the swelling in their knees, the loss of someone they hadn't finished mourning. It made you warm, made you laugh, made you believe you might sleep through the night without dreams. And so they bought it, crates of it. Bottles cradled like infants. They brought it home, took sips before supper, or in the dark alone with the windows shut tight. They poured it into their tea. They tucked it into satchels before long rides. Some fed it to the sick. Some fed it to children. Some poured it into the mouths of those already too far gone to swallow. It was hope in a bottle, and it worked. Until it didn't. You wouldn't last a day, not because of what was in the bottle, but because of how easily people handed over their trust. You'd see the shine on the label. You'd hear the trembling gratitude in a widow's voice. You'd watch a man open the cork like it was salvation. And you'd know, deep in your chest, that it was a lie, that it wouldn't last, that it might even kill. Still, people smiled more the day Bellamy came. The music helped, the laughter too. And sometimes the belief was strong enough to do what the medicine never could. Sometimes the feeling of being helped was all they needed to carry on one more day. He never stayed long, a few days at most. When someone died, and someone always did, he vanished before sunrise. Left the wagon parked at the edge of town, stripped of its color, its promises. Just bare boards and wheels creaking in the wind. A ghost of a man who'd never left a real name behind. But the bottles stayed. In cabinets, under beds, behind prayer books. People knew they were poison, but they held on to them anyway. because sometimes poison felt better than nothing at all. The fare has packed up, the wagon is gone, the music has faded. There is no elixir beside your bed, no sweet lie waiting to be sipped in the dark. Let the ache be honest. Let the quiet be enough. You do not need to be cured tonight. You do not need to be tricked into rest. Your pain is real, but so is your breath, and so is the way your body softens when no one is asking anything more of it. You are not fooled. You are not broken. You are not in need of a bottle. And let truth be the gentlest remedy. The doctor who left scars on purpose. They said he could sew anything. Skin, tendons, a man's eyelid, once a woman's scalp, torn clean open by a wagon wheel. His fingers moved like thread through fabric, slow and steady, never hesitating, never lost in the mess. He was known across 4 counties not because he healed best, but because he always left a mark. Always. His name was Dr. Isaiah Crane. No one called him Doc, just Crane. Just the needle man. He wore black gloves, always. Even when the sun beat down, even when sweat poured, even when blood soaked through and made the leather slick. His coat was stitched from old cavalry fabric, dark blue, brass buttons dulled with age. He kept his hair long, tied back, and his eyes hid behind gold-rimmed spectacles, even at night. No one ever saw him sleep. He didn't believe in beauty. He believed in closure, in making the skin stay shut, and keeping the wound from reopening, no matter what it cost. His stitches were thick, cross-hatched, brutal. He used thread meant for saddles. His needles weren't curved, they were straight, thick, heavy. Some said he sharpened them with a file meant for arrowheads. People came to him when the other doctors failed. When a knife wound gaped open, when a bear claw tore through the side, when the belly split during childbirth, he never turned them away, but he always warned them, "I'll keep you alive, but you won't look the same." He said it like a promise, and he kept it. Women left his table with scars across their stomachs, shoulders, breasts. Men with ropey puckered skin that ran from neck to hip like old roads on a map. Some refused to look at themselves afterward. Some traced the marks at night, as if they were reading the story he'd written into them. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the pain, but because of what you'd be left with. You'd see the needle in his hand, the way he threaded it with steady fingers, and know it would never be delicate, that he would pull your flesh together not gently, but tightly, that it would hold, but it would show. Still, he saved more people than he lost. And in a world where death sat on every doorstep, that mattered. There was a man whose leg he stitched back after a wolf tore it open. A woman whose twin survived only because Crane opened her, fast and sure, and stitched her shut again before she bled dry. The scars were thick, ugly, but they breathed. They held. He didn't ask for money, only asked that people not come back for vanity. "If you're still bleeding," he'd say, "I'll see you. If you just don't like the way it looks, find a mirror that lies." He carried no tools in a bag, wore them instead, strapped to his chest, his belt hidden in folds of his coat. Scissors, clamps, a bottle of carbolic acid which he poured directly onto wounds, hissing like the devil. He never flinched, never wiped away tears. If someone screamed, he nodded, as if saying, "Yes, that's how it should feel." Some people hated him, called him cruel, called him careless, said he stitched like he was patching saddlebags. But others said different, said he was the only one who ever stayed calm when the blood poured, the only one who didn't blink when the intestines spilled across the floor, the only one who always finished what he started. And when someone died under his hands, because sometimes they did. He didn't curse. He didn't weep. He just pulled the coat over their body and stitched it shut, too. One last seam, one last silence. The needle has been set aside. The thread has gone slack. Your wounds are not open. Your skin is not gaping. There is no blood in your breath. No scar rising like a rope beneath your chest. You are not under the lantern light. You are not biting down on leather. You are not the next patient. You are not in pain. You are whole. You are enough. And if you have scars, they are old. And if they show, let them. The doctor has no more stitching to do, and your body is already held together just fine. The doctor who used fire. They said he could burn the sickness out of you, that he carried a flame in his hand and knew exactly where to press it. He wasn't old, but he looked it. Wrinkled, where the sun hit hardest, hands thick with calluses, eyes the pale blue of early morning frost. His name was Dr. Pennard, but most just called him Ash, because wherever he went, the smell of smoke lingered. On his coat, in his breath, on your skin if he treated you. He believed in cauterization, not just as a last resort, but as the first. Infection, he said, didn't fear knives, but it feared fire. Where the flame touches, he'd whisper, death runs out. His voice was soft, always, even when people screamed. Especially then, he traveled light. A satchel slung across one shoulder, a length of iron rods bundled like arrows, a small coal stove he lit with a flint that sparked on the first strike every time. There was a ritual to it. He would kneel, open the stove's little belly, feed it bits of wood, cloth, herbs, then sit and wait, hands folded, until the iron turned orange, then red, then white, until it hummed, not like metal, but like something alive. Then he'd lift it with tongs, and the world would stop breathing. He never hurried. He'd explain, gently, what he would do. He'd tell you exactly how long it would last. Just until the hiss stops, he'd say. Then you'll be free. And then he'd press the metal to your skin, and the pain would come like thunder inside your bones. There was no screaming in his presence. People tried at first, but the sound of burning flesh has a way of silencing a room. It crackles. It spits. It makes you listen. It makes you forget what your own voice sounds like. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the heat, but because of the smell. The way it wraps around your memory and holds on. You'd smell it for hours, days. Years later, you'd catch it in the smoke of a winter fire and remember, something you never lived but now understand, that pain can be sacred and cruel, and sometimes both. Still, he saved people. He stopped the spread. Gangrene, rot, fever that ran in circles. He cauterized wounds that would have killed. He burned edges until they were clean, closed, sealed with a hiss and a prayer. His hands were sure, his gaze steady. He didn't enjoy it, but he never doubted it. He once treated a child who'd stepped on a nail. The leg was already blackening. The family begged him to amputate, but Ash just shook his head, lit the stove, pressed the iron along the boy's foot, slow and straight. The boy didn't cry, just passed out. Woke 2 days later, fever broken, foot intact. Limped for a year, danced at his wedding. People feared Ash, but they respected him. When he walked into a room, people cleared space, not because he demanded it, because the fire followed him, quietly, faithfully, always waiting. He never built a home, never stayed. Said fire didn't belong in one place, that it should move, burn, heal, then disappear. The stove is cold, the coals are gray, the irons are wrapped in cloth. You are not in his path. Your body is whole. There is no flame tonight, no press of heat, no hiss of skin sealing itself closed. Let the air be cool. Let the silence stay soft. Let your breath rise and fall like smoke with nowhere to go. You are not wounded. You are not infected. You are not marked. You are untouched. You are safe. You are beyond the reach of fire. And let the light stay gentle. The Doctor Who operated on the dead. He arrived in towns where no one asked him to come. No lantern, no wagon, just a worn satchel, a black coat that hung past his knees, and a book with no title. His name was never clear. Some called him Elias, some said Ezra, and some refused to speak his name at all. He wasn't there to heal. He didn't knock on doors. He waited until someone died. Then he would ask, not for the body, for permission. I can learn, he'd say, so others won't suffer. And no one ever wanted to say yes. But some did. When grief sat too heavy. When hope had already broken. When the body in the next room was no longer warm. They'd nod, and he would begin. He called himself a student, not a doctor. Said he was learning from the flesh. Reading the body like scripture. Said the dead had lessons the living refused to teach. And in towns where medicine was still guesswork, where a man might die from a splinter and a child from a cough, some people believed him. He worked alone. In barns, in back rooms, in sheds lit by a single oil lamp. He carried a long knife, curved like a sickle, and smaller tools, delicate as silverware. He wore gloves when he could, but when he ran out, he simply washed his hands in whiskey and pressed on. The bodies were still, cold, silent, but he treated them as if they could speak, asked questions as he cut. Where did it go wrong? Was it in the lungs? Was it the blood? No one answered, but he kept asking. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the bodies, but because of the reverence. The way he touched the skin, the way he peeled it back like old bark, the way he seemed to love the anatomy, not in a strange or cruel way, but in a way that said, you are a mystery, and I want to understand you. He drew sketches, beautiful, precise, with ink so fine it bled like veins. He labeled everything, sometimes in English, sometimes in Latin, sometimes in symbols only he seemed to understand. He pinned pages to the walls, lungs like wings, hearts like broken fruit, fingers splayed and labeled with a quiet awe. Not everyone approved. Some called him a ghoul, a grave robber, a madman, but he never touched the dead without permission, never disturbed a grave, only waited, only asked, only opened what had already been closed, and promised it would never be in vain. Some said he saved lives later, in other towns. He'd see a wound and know what lay beneath, where the tendon frayed, where the infection hid, where to cut, where to stop. He spoke calmly, surely, as if he'd already seen this moment once before and now simply repeated it, better. But he never smiled, never laughed, just moved from body to body, town to town, leaving behind stitched incisions and pages filled with notes no one knew how to read. One day, someone asked him, "Why not become a real doctor?" He answered, "I trust the dead more than the living." And that was all. The table is empty. The scalpel is sheathed. The oil lamp has burned low. There is no cold breath at your neck. No questions echoing through your ribs. You are not open. You are not a study. You are alive. Let your body be yours again. Let your heart beat in peace. Let the silence come without weight. You are not dissected. You are not dissecting. You are whole, private, unexamined. The book is closed, and the lesson is over. The doctor who believed dreams could kill. He never touched a patient. That was the first thing people noticed. He wore gloves, yes, but he never laid hands on anyone, not even to take a pulse, not even to feel a fever. Instead, he watched, listened, asked questions no one else would dare. "What did you dream last night?" he'd ask. "And the night before?" He wasn't after wounds. He was after something stranger, something softer and darker and harder to name. He believed dreams could kill, and he spent his life trying to stop them. His name was Dr. Lyle Winscott, though he never spoke it himself. Others whispered it with a kind of hesitation, as if the syllables might summon something else. He appeared when a town was troubled not by plague or fever, but by nightmares. Not when people were dying, but when they were too afraid to sleep. When whole families began waking at once, screaming, weeping, forgetting where they were. He didn't carry a bag, just a black book and a pencil sharpened to a needlepoint. He asked about symbols, about rivers, about teeth, about falling, about hands that reached from nowhere. "Did the moon speak to you?" he'd ask. "Was there a voice in the water? Did you wake up with dirt under your nails?" People stared, but some nodded. He believed the mind could bleed into the body, that terror in sleep could make the heart forget how to beat, that shame, buried deep in a person's chest, could rot a man from the inside out. He believed that the worst illnesses had no temperature, only silence and shaking hands and eyes that wouldn't meet the mirror. He didn't prescribe herbs or powders or pills. He prescribed confession, told people to speak what they'd hidden, to draw what they'd seen, to dig out the roots before they grew too deep. Some laughed, some refused, some told him to leave, but others listened. A woman who hadn't slept in 5 nights wept for hours in his presence, then curled up on a cot and slept without dreams. A boy who saw shadows in corners learned to speak them aloud, to name them, and watch them vanish. A man who carried guilt from a war no one won, wrote it all down on 43 pages and burned them, and claimed the next day he could finally breathe. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the dreams, but because of how much truth he expected. You'd want a pill, a poultice, a ritual. But he'd only offer a chair, a long silence, and the same question again. What came for you in the night? Still, he didn't chase people. If they walked away, he let them. But if they stayed, even trembling, he'd open the black book and begin to draw. Circles, spirals, a house with no doors, a tree split down the center. "This is what your mind looks like," he'd whisper. "Let's give it something gentler to dream about." No one knew where he went when he wasn't working. He never slept in town, never stayed in one place long. Some said he slept sitting up. Some said he never slept at all. And once, in a village nearly lost to madness, someone found him standing in the middle of a burned-out chapel, barefoot, face to the sky, eyes wide, whispering, "This is where it begins. The dream is waking up." The questions are quiet. The notebook is closed. No voices in the walls, no shadows at the foot of your bed. There is nothing chasing you through the dark. There is no language trying to claw its way into your breath. Let the dream come slow. Let it be soft. Let it be yours. No one is watching. No one is drawing your fears. No one is asking you to explain. You are not a study. You are not a case. You are not broken by your sleep. And let the dream pass without leaving a mark. The doctor who wrote prescriptions in blood. They said he was brilliant. Said he'd studied at a university no one could pronounce, far across the sea where the snow never melted, and the books were older than the walls that held them. But by the time he arrived in the West, brilliance had hardened into something colder, something sharper. They said his name was Dr. Thorne, though some said that wasn't a name at all, just a word he'd taken for himself, because thorns protect and thorns pierce. He did both. His tools were clean, his coat was spotless, his boots polished, his speech clipped and exacting. But the thing that set him apart, the thing that left people whispering after he passed, was that he never wrote prescriptions on paper. He used blood, not always the patient's, sometimes his own, sometimes the blood of animals. A rabbit, a crow, once even a pig. He'd prick the skin with a blade no bigger than a sewing needle, and with the blood he'd draw symbols, intricate, curving, never the same twice. He said they were medical formulas written in a language too old for letters. Medicine, he said, had forgotten what it once was, that before there were pills, there was pattern. Before there were bottles, there was binding. He believed that writing something in blood gave it weight, permanence, that healing wasn't just about chemistry but about intent, that ink faded, but blood remembered. He'd press the markings onto cloth or skin, let them dry. Sometimes he'd burn them, sometimes he'd whisper to them. Once, he stitched a symbol into a woman's arm, gently, carefully, as if sewing a secret into her skin. Her fever broke that night. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the symbols, but because of the certainty, the way he spoke them, the way he said this will work, while everyone else was still arguing about what to call the sickness. You'd want to believe him, and you'd hate that you did. Still, strange as it was, he had results. People walked again. Tumors shrank. Wounds closed that no one thought would. A boy who hadn't spoken in a year said one word after Thorne traced a spiral in lamb's blood on his palm. The word was home. He didn't accept coin, only memories. Asked his patients to tell him something they'd never said aloud before. A betrayal, a longing, a dream. Some found that worse than payment, but those who did it, who told him, said it felt like opening a door inside the chest they hadn't known was locked. Of course, not all his work lasted. The effects faded, sometimes weeks later, sometimes hours. And when they did, the illness returned deeper, stronger, as if insulted by having been silenced, as if it had learned. And when someone died under his care, he didn't run. He'd sit beside the body, close the eyes, and mark a final symbol over the heart. A swirl, a curve, a small, perfect circle. So it doesn't follow, he'd say. He kept no home, slept under the stars, wrapped in blankets stitched with lines and runes. Birds circled wherever he went. Crows, mostly, owls, sometimes. He claimed they read his markings like maps. The blood has dried, the blade is clean, the symbols have faded. There is no curve inked on your skin, no ancient word whispered over your name, no binding pressed into your bones. You are not marked, not written into some old language. You are whole, not a prescription, not a canvas, just breath and bone and softness, untouched. You don't owe a secret, you don't need a cure, you don't need strange letters to remind your body how to rest. And let your healing speak in silence. The Doctor Who used the dead to heal the living. No one saw him arrive. He was just there one day, standing behind the church like he'd grown up from the ground itself. Tall, pale, shoulders hunched like someone used to being ignored. They said he slept in the graveyard, said he kept his hands folded and his back to the chapel wall, eyes closed, head bowed, as if praying, but never to anything anyone else believed in. His name was Dr. Malden, though most avoided it. In some towns, they just called him the borrower, because that's what he did. He borrowed from the dead, from the silence, from places no one else dared to look. He didn't carry a bag or a wagon or a notebook. He carried a bundle wrapped in canvas, tied with black thread, and what lay inside depended on what he'd taken last. A bone, a tooth, a dried strip of skin, a fragment of scalp, a joint wrapped in cloth and herbs that smelled like winter. He never explained where they came from, and no one wanted to know. He believed that death held its own kind of wisdom, that something passed on could still teach, could still give. That if a man had died of sickness, his body might carry the key to cure another. That flesh, properly used, was more than just waste. It was medicine, memory, a vessel still brimming with usefulness. He called it sympathetic binding. Said that if you placed the bone of a man who'd survived a wound next to a similar wound in another body, the second would heal, not through science, not through sorcery, through sympathy. One body remembering the survival of the other. It sounded like madness, but people watched their wounds close, watched fevers fade, watched pain retreat, and some believed. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the bones, but because of the reverence. The way he treated the dead like saints, the way he lit candles before unwrapping each artifact, the way he murmured names to the things he carried, as if they were still listening, as if they deserved to. He stitched bits of bone into leather amulets, tied them around throats and wrists, buried them under pillows. Sometimes he asked for a piece of your hair, sometimes a fingernail. Always something small. He said healing required exchange. You couldn't take without offering. Some doctors mocked him. Others said nothing, because their patients, who'd given up on pills and poultices, began to walk again. Some claimed his cures were short-lived, that the pain returned, that the sickness came back wearing a different name. But others said once the healing happened, it stayed, because it wasn't just physical. It was remembrance, a pact. He never asked for payment. Only that when someone died, the family let him come after. Not to rob, not to desecrate, to ask permission. And if it was given, he took one piece, a tooth, a bone from the finger, something small, wrapped it, whispered over it, and vanished. Still, not everyone trusted him. Some said the dead should rest, that his work was a curse in disguise, that no healing could come from breaking the rules of rest. But others said, if I had died first, I would have wanted my pain to mean something. And when he healed you, truly healed you, he left behind a scrap of paper. No words, just a mark. 2 curved lines, one crossing the other. A symbol no one could read, but some chose to carry it with them, folded in a pocket, tucked into a Bible, stitched into a hem. He disappeared in winter most years. Said the dead were quieter then, harder to reach. But he always came back in spring, when the ground thawed and sickness bloomed alongside the flowers. The bones are buried. The candles have gone out. No one is whispering names, no relics lie beneath your pillow. You are not part of someone else's healing. You are your own. Let your body be just yours tonight. Let no old pain borrow space in your chest. Let no ghost offer help. You are enough, whole, full, living. You are not bound. You are not borrowed. You are not stitched to the past. And let the dead rest. You are the living, and you are already healing. The doctor who never stopped smiling. He was handsome, in the way that made people trust him without knowing why. Tall, neat, sleeves always rolled just so, hair slicked back with oil that smelled faintly of cloves. His voice was warm, the kind you'd follow into a room even if every instinct said don't. He called himself Dr. Julian Gray, though there were whispers that he'd been Julian Black, or Julian Finch, or just Julian once, when the name still belonged to a man with a soul. He smiled when he stitched, smiled when he cut, smiled when you bled on the floor. Not a grin, not mockery, just a soft, serene, upward curve, like a man who saw something beautiful in everything broken. He never raised his voice, never rushed. Moved like a pianist, precise and gentle, even when your body was trembling under his hands. He spoke slowly, always, as if every word was a promise, and people believed him. He set up his practice in a parlor once used for dancing. Lace curtains, tall windows, a polished floor you could see your face in. It looked safe, clean, refined, but no one walked past that building without feeling something crawl under their skin, as if the wind blew colder near it, as if it swallowed noise. He believed in opening people up, not just for emergencies, for curiosity, for diagnosis, for clarity. The body speaks, he'd say, but only when invited. He performed exploratory surgeries like tea parties, with music playing, with flowers in the room, with a warm cloth over your eyes and lavender rubbed into your wrists. And always, always the smile. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the surgery, but because of how he looked at you. Not like a person, like a puzzle, a beautiful one, like something he wanted to fix, even if it wasn't broken. Especially if it wasn't broken. He'd tilt his head and murmur, "You're holding something deep inside. Shall we let it out?" Still, he helped people. For a time, a woman with stomach pain no one else could explain. He opened her, found a twisted knot in her intestines, fixed it, and closed her with hands so gentle she barely scarred. A man with a seizure disorder, he drilled a hole behind the ear, inserted something he'd made himself, a silver wire wrapped in oilcloth, and the seizures stopped. For a while. But not everyone left his parlor. Some stayed overnight. For observation, he said. Others longer. The mind needs time, he'd explain. The body follows its own clock. Eventually, their families stopped asking questions, because the answers never made sense. He kept notes in elegant script, diaries filled with diagrams and phrases that sounded like poetry and prophecy at once. There's light inside the blood. The heart hums in 4 tones. Pain is just a door we've been taught not to open. One notebook ended mid-sentence. Her voice was in the marrow. There was a boy, maybe 12, who came in with leg pain. Gray said it was nothing, just growing. But he opened him anyway. The boy never walked again. Gray smiled and said, "Still, he'll grow taller now." Eventually, people stopped going, or went only when there were no other choices left. His smile never changed. Not once. It stayed fixed like the curve of a knife left in a fire too long. Some said he never slept, that he sat in his chair by the window, watching, all night, unmoving. Some said they saw lights flickering from the attic, long past midnight. Some said the music never stopped, even when no one was inside. The music is off. The chair is empty. The smile has faded from the room. You are not being watched. You are not being opened. You are not an experiment. No hands are measuring your pulse. No voice is asking you to breathe deeper. No promises wrapped in sweetness are reaching for your ribs. You are whole. You are untouched. You are not a puzzle to be solved. You are not someone else's beauty. And keep all your pieces where they belong. The doctor who collected pain. He never took anything home. Not money, not gifts, not even food. Except pain. That's what they said. That he gathered it, stored it, kept it close like other men kept gold. He didn't look like much. Wiry, plain. hair gone thin, boots worn down to the soles. He moved like someone who'd been walking forever and didn't remember why he started. His coat was patched from too many winters. His bag, stitched and restitched. But he always knew where it hurt, even before you said a word. They called him Dr. Ansel, just that. Quietly. As if saying his name too loud might make the ache come back. He didn't set up shop. He didn't hang a shingle or ring a bell. He just appeared, in doorways, at bedsides, beside riverbanks where men clutched their ribs and wondered if this was the end. He'd kneel gently, like approaching a wounded animal, and say, "Show me." And when you did, he listened. He listened with his hands, with his eyes, with the slowness of someone who wasn't in a hurry to fix you, only to understand what had broken. He didn't speak much, and when he did, it wasn't questions. It was acknowledgments. Yes, that's deep. It's been there a long time. He carried a jar, small black glass with a cork stopper. He never opened it. But when someone wept, or screamed, or moaned through a memory they couldn't bear to speak aloud, he'd hold the jar closer, just for a moment. And afterward, people swore they felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, but like something heavy had stepped off their chest. He said pain was like water. It pooled, it flooded, it had to go somewhere. And if it couldn't leave the body, it would rot it from the inside out. So he offered himself as the floodgate, a place to pour it, quietly, wordlessly, without judgment. No surgeries, no medicines, just presence. And something else no one could quite name. You wouldn't last a day, not because it hurt, but because of how much hurt you'd suddenly feel. Things you'd buried, things you'd laughed off, things you said didn't matter would rise in your throat the moment he looked at you. Not unkindly, not to punish, but as if he already knew what you hadn't told anyone, and was willing to carry it if you let him. Still, some people said it worked. A woman who hadn't spoken since her child died whispered 4 words into his shoulder, then sang a lullaby that night as she washed dishes. A soldier who hadn't slept sober in months fell into a dreamless sleep in the straw beside his horse after sitting with Ansel for an hour. A man with nothing visibly wrong, just a blank stare and a shaking hand, came back from the river walking straight, though no one could say what was different. No one knew what was in the jar. Some said tears. Others said shadow. Some said it wasn't about the jar at all, that the act of holding it made people feel like their pain had a destination, like it wouldn't be stuck inside them forever. And he never judged. Not the crying, not the anger, not the guilt or the grief or the sharp, unspoken kind of sadness that lives in the bones. He took it all the same. His eyes grew duller with every season, but his presence remained steady, solid, like a tree that bends in storms but never falls. Then one day he was gone, left no mark, no note, just the jar on the steps of the church. Corked, cool to the touch, too heavy for its size, and beside it, a scrap of paper with 3 words written in an unfamiliar hand. It's full now. The jar is sealed. The grief has been set down. The air is quiet. No one is asking you to recall what you buried. No one is holding space for your sorrow, because you don't need to give it away tonight. You don't need to carry it either. Let the ache loosen in your chest. Let the shame drift out like mist. Let your body be a place of warmth, not weight. You are not the pain. You are not the jar. You are not responsible for carrying what broke you. And feel what it's like to rest, without holding anything at all. The Doctor Who promised nothing. He didn't wear a coat, didn't carry a bag, didn't speak with the slow confidence of most frontier doctors who hid their fear behind too many words. He said nothing unless he had to, and even then, only the bare minimum. His name was Dr. Hale, just that. No titles, no good morning, no how are you feeling, just Hale. You asked him for help, and he nodded. You bled, and he bound the wound. You sobbed, and he let you. But he never promised you'd get better, not once. That's what made him terrifying. Because everyone else, the quacks, the sawbones, the miracle men, all promised something. Relief, recovery, a future. They told you they knew what they were doing. Hale didn't. He said nothing at all. And somehow, that silence made everything he did feel more real, more honest. Like he knew the odds weren't in your favor and didn't pretend otherwise. He arrived quietly, always on foot, sat by the fire when offered, slept with his back to the wall, watched people, not with suspicion, with curiosity, like he was still trying to learn what people were made of, how they broke, how they healed. He asked questions sometimes, sharp, short ones. How long? Where? Worse at night? But mostly he listened. You could tell him everything or nothing, and he'd still treat you. He didn't require trust, only stillness. His hands were steady, his methods plain. Hot water, clean cloth. A blade sharpened on stone, thread he boiled first. His technique wasn't gentle, but it was careful, like someone fixing something they didn't own. He'd clean wounds slowly, stitch without speaking, cover it in cloth and move on. If you flinched, he didn't pause. If you cried, he didn't look away. You wouldn't last a day, not because he was cruel, but because he didn't offer the comfort people have come to expect from those who heal. No hand-holding, no reassurances. You'd want a whisper of hope, a promise, a future shaped in kind words, but Hale would only nod, fold his cloth, and say, "It'll do." Still, he stayed. When others ran from outbreaks, he walked into them. When others looked for payment, he looked for symptoms. He didn't ask who you were before you were sick, didn't ask what you'd done. He didn't care about guilt or class or past mistakes. He treated who was in front of him, and that was all. He lost patience like everyone did, but he never blamed them, never cursed the gods or the weather or the lateness of the messenger who brought him. He just closed their eyes, washed his hands, and moved on. People said he kept a journal, not of treatments, but of final words. Whole pages filled with the last things people said to him. Sometimes just one word, tell, or wait, or I thought. And just once, someone asked him, "Do you ever hope they'll live?" He paused, looked up, and said, "Hope's got nothing to do with it." Still, they trusted him, because he never made it worse. Because he showed up. Because when the bleeding started, Hale was the man you wanted in the room, not to save you, but to make sure, if it came to dying, that you did it clean. The knife is on the table. The thread is coiled. The room is still. You are not under his hands. There is no wound to sew, no silence to interpret. You are not waiting for him to say, "You'll be fine," because tonight, you already are. You don't need promises. You don't need predictions. You don't need anyone to guess what comes next. You are not broken. You are not unfinished. You are not beyond help. You simply are, and that is enough. And let the quiet hold you the way words never could. The Doctor Who claimed to hear the body speak. He never used a stethoscope. Said it got in the way. Said it muffled the truth. Dr. Elias Myrne, they called him, though most just called him the listener. He believed every body spoke, not in words, but in murmurs, rhythms, vibrations too soft for most to feel. He didn't believe in symptoms. He believed in signals, in secrets, And he said his hands could hear what mouths never dared to say. He didn't dress like a doctor. Wore homespun shirts, sleeves always rolled, a stone around his neck tied with a threadbare string. No shoes ever. Said the ground told him things. His patients lay not on beds, but in the dirt, under trees, on bare floors. The body knows what it needs, he'd say. We just have to be quiet long enough to listen. He'd sit beside you, cross-legged, knees touching yours, and press his palm to your chest, or your back, or the inside of your wrist. Then he'd close his eyes, breathe slow, and the room would go so still you'd forget you were even breathing. Sometimes he sat like that for minutes, sometimes for hours. Then he'd open his eyes and speak. You're grieving. You've held your jaw clenched since October. Your left shoulder remembers what your mouth won't admit. He was rarely wrong. He didn't cut. He didn't stitch. He didn't pour bitter tonics or apply leeches. He used pressure, breath, warmth. Stones left in the sun and placed along the spine. Water boiled with bark and whispered over before being sipped. He'd lie beside his patients in the grass and ask them to hum, not words, just tones, and match their breath to his. Said the body wanted to harmonize. That healing was remembering your own song. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the treatment, but because of what surfaced when everything else went quiet. You'd feel things rise up, old pain, forgotten tension, grief stored in the hips and hands. You'd flinch at your own stillness. You'd want to run. And he'd say gently, there's no need to outrun the truth. It already knows where you live. Still, people changed. A woman who limped for 3 years walked away barefoot, weeping. A boy who hadn't spoken since his mother died sat beside Dr. Mern for a night, humming softly, and left with his voice unbroken. A man whose anger had poisoned everyone around him was seen days later planting flowers in a graveyard, silently but peacefully. He didn't keep records, just sang to himself, soft little melodies in a language no one else seemed to know. When asked where he learned his craft, he only smiled and tapped 2 fingers to his chest. Here, he said, and here, placing his hand to the earth. He believed pain had shape, that grief had sound, that sickness was just the body trying to be heard, and that most doctors were too loud to listen. There are no words to speak, no stories to recall, no hands resting on your ribs, just breath, just stillness, just the quiet shape of you as you are, untouched, uncorrected, enough. You don't have to explain. You don't have to justify. You don't have to remember every injury that brought you here. You are not broken. You are not unheard. You are not waiting for someone else to name your pain. You are listening, and you are healing. The body knows what to do. Just give it silence and time. The Doctor Who measured souls. He wore a watch, always. Not for time, but for weight. Said he could feel a change when someone was near death. Not in their pulse, but in something deeper. The soul, he said, gets heavier just before it leaves. People think it floats away, light as air. But that's wrong. It builds, it collects, until it can't stay anymore. His name was Dr. Velen. He dressed in gray, stitched his name into his coat cuff, and carried a scale that looked more suited for gold dust than for medicine. Tiny brass pans, delicate chains, a needle that trembled with every breath in the room. He didn't ask where it hurt. He asked when. When did it begin? He'd say. What day did your soul decide it had seen enough? People didn't understand, but they let him measure them anyway. He'd press the scale to your chest, or your palm, or once for a man who'd gone mute to the center of the forehead. He closed his eyes as he did it, whispered numbers under his breath. Sometimes he wrote them down. Sometimes he didn't. He called them soul weight units and said a healthy person measured steady, not low, not high, but somewhere in the calm middle. The dying were lighter than they should be, or heavier, but never balanced. His treatments weren't about curing the body. They were about restoring the weight. The body follows the soul, he'd say, not the other way around. You wouldn't last a day, not because of the strangeness, but because of the stillness. The way he looked at you like he was reading something beneath your skin, not judging, just seeing. The numbers mattered more than your face, more than your name. He'd tilt his head and say, "You've been carrying something that isn't yours," or, "Your sorrow is pushing the scale off-center." And you'd believe him because the numbers always told the truth. He had no medicines, no salves. He taught people how to breathe, how to stop apologizing to themselves, how to speak names aloud that had been buried for decades. He buried a scale once, in the dirt beside a creek. Said it had held too many lies, then carved a new one from wood and iron, and told it nothing but prayers before using it again. Still, people found peace with him. They came not to be healed, but to understand. A woman who never cried found herself weeping for hours after he measured her and simply said, "Your grief has been hiding behind your lungs." A man who had grown cruel after war sat in front of him for 6 minutes in silence, then rose and left a coin on the floor without speaking. Weeks later, he was seen mending a broken fence that wasn't his. Dr. Veline never asked for thanks, never said goodbye. He arrived without warning and left just the same. Only the sound of the scale's pan tapping softly in the wind remained. Once, a child asked him, "What does your own soul weigh?" And he paused, not smiling, not frowning, just still, and said, "Too much to measure, not enough to leave." The scale is quiet. The numbers have stopped. There is no weight pressing on your ribs, no whisper in the dark asking what you've carried too long. Close your eyes. Your soul is steady. Not heavy, not light, just yours. And that is enough. You are not broken. You are not tipping the balance. You are not falling away from yourself. You are here, held, centered. And let the measure of your being rest beside you, untouched, unseen, perfect as it is. The woman with the cure-all bottle. She came into town with a basket instead of a bag, wore a bonnet so wide it shadowed her whole face, and a dress that looked more dust than fabric. No one called her doctor, not at first. They called her Miss Orla, or that strange widow from the edge of the flats. But she had bottles, dozens of them, lined up on her shelf like soldiers, some brown, some green, some clear as glass left too long in the sun. Tinctures, tonics, elixirs that promised too much. She'd smile with tight lips and say her medicines restored balance, said they chased out phlegm, soothed hysteria, fixed the blood when it wandered off course. People listened because her voice was calm and her eyes never blinked too much. And they came, the coughing, the limping, the ones who couldn't sleep, the ones who slept too much. She'd touch their hands with fingertips cool as creek stones and hand them bottles wrapped in rag, some sweet, some bitter, some that fizzed on the tongue like river mud in spring. She used herbs mostly, wild ones, yarrow, horehound, willow bark when she could find it, turpentine when she couldn't, a few drops of morphine in the worst cases, laudanum in the rest. She never explained the ingredients, said it was better not to know, said the body would listen even if the mind didn't. There were stories about her, that she had once nursed a whole wagon train through a fever, that she had killed her husband with a teacup full of belladonna, that she had delivered twins with nothing but a belt and a hymn. People whispered. But when the fever came, when the cough stuck to the ribs like mold on bread, they came to her door anyway. No one knew where she learned. Maybe from her mother, maybe from a book, maybe from watching things die too often to pretend anymore. But she knew how to take pain and stir it down into syrup. She knew how to make suffering sleep, even if only for a little while. You wouldn't last an hour in her shop. The smell alone would knock you off your feet, thick with camphor and smoke, bloodroot and boiled citrus peel. You'd see the jars, the stains, the ledger written in shorthand only she understood. You'd want to ask what was in the bottle, but you wouldn't. You'd just drink it, because the pain in your stomach had spread to your bones and you were out of prayers. And maybe you'd feel better. Maybe you'd sleep. Maybe you'd stop coughing, at least long enough to feel like yourself again. And maybe that was enough. But tonight, you don't need the bottle. You don't need the bitter drop on your tongue or the slow blur of the world slipping sideways. You are not fevered, not shaking, not staring down another sleepless night. You are safe. The basket is closed. The bottles are quiet. Miss Orla has gone back into the dusk, her long shadow stretching out over the plain. And you are resting, dreamless and still. The plague doctor in disguise. He wasn't called a plague doctor. That word was too old, too heavy, but people used it anyway, under their breath, behind curtains, when the sickness got too thick to ignore. He had no beaked mask, no black robe, just a long coat that never came off, and a scarf pulled tight across his mouth, even in summer. They said he'd walked through a dozen towns where everyone else had died, said he carried the sickness in his boots and the cure in his eyes. No one knew where he came from. He showed up only when things got bad, when coughing turned red, when the dead outnumbered the living. He didn't knock, just appeared. On porches, in doorways, by the bed, as if conjured by the last gasp of someone who'd already gone cold. He didn't carry tools, not like other doctors. No saw, no stethoscope. Just a long pouch of powders and a needle made from bone. He moved quiet, spoke quieter, and never asked questions. Just felt your forehead, looked into your mouth and whispered something in a language no one could place. Then he'd mix something into a cup and hand it over without a word. You drank. You waited. Sometimes you lived. Sometimes you didn't. He wasn't trusted, but he was needed. Because when the towns were shuttered, when the flies outnumbered the prayers, he came. And even if he didn't save you, he stayed until the worst had passed, then vanished. The only thing left behind was a scrap of cloth or a mark on the door, an old symbol no one could read. Some swore he was a charlatan, a lunatic who'd wandered too far from a field hospital back east. Others said he was a ghost, returned to make peace with the plagues he'd once failed to stop. One boy claimed he saw the man take off his scarf, and that underneath was a mouth sewn shut with silver thread. No one believed him, but no one asked him to explain either. You'd have run. You'd have locked your doors and hidden your face. You'd have smelled the sickness in the air, thick and coppery, and begged him not to come near, because healing, when it came from a figure like that, didn't feel like rescue. It felt like surrender. But tonight, there is no plague, no bloodied sheets, no coughing behind the walls. You are not waiting to see if you'll be next. You are not watching your neighbor's house grow quiet. You are here, breathing deep, untainted. The man with the scarf has passed you by. The sickness did not take root. The shadow did not enter. And your door remains unopened. The barber with the red striped pole. He cut hair. That's how it started, with clippers dulled by use and scissors that stuck at the hinge. A brush of the cape, a splash of bay rum, a trim that cost 15 cents, plus a nickel for a shave if you were lucky. But when someone said doc, half the time they meant the barber, because he had a chair, and he had a blade, and he wasn't afraid to use either for more than sideburns. Toothache? He'd pull it, with pliers made for fence nails. Infection? He'd lance it, with a sewing needle held to a flame. Boil? Sliced open, drained, wiped down with whiskey and prayer. He was quick, he was brutal, but he worked cheap and asked no questions. In a town without a proper doctor, that made him indispensable. His barber shop smelled like blood beneath the cologne, like skin and sweat and old metal. The red and white pole outside, it wasn't just decoration, it was a symbol, carried from Europe, back when barbers were surgeons and surgeons were dangerous. The red for blood, the white for bandages, the spiral a reminder that not all healing was clean. He kept his razors on a belt, sharpened them before every cut, dipped them in water that hadn't been changed in a week. He didn't wear gloves, wore an apron that held every stain from every face he'd ever touched, and he hummed while he worked. Not songs, just low, wordless sounds, like a whetstone dragged across steel. He had a good touch sometimes, could coax a splinter from a heel without making a child cry, could stitch a wound without leaving a scar if he wasn't drunk, but he drank often. Said it kept his hands steady, said it helped him forget the ones he'd lost. One man came in with a rash, left with a burn. Another came in with a cough, left in a pine box, but still, they came, because he was there, because his door stayed open when others shut theirs. You wouldn't have trusted him. You'd have stared at the yellowed towel, the darkened sink, the dust caught in the bristles of the brush. You'd have felt the shiver when he stood behind you, blade in hand. But you'd have stayed in the chair, because the pain in your jaw was worse, because there were no other hands willing to touch you. But tonight, the chair is empty, the blade is resting. You are not bleeding. You are not swollen. You are not waiting for a man with whiskey on his breath to count to 3 and yank the pain out of your skull. You are whole. The barber shop has closed for the night. The pole has stopped spinning. And you are safe at home. Your teeth quiet, your breath steady. Let the clatter of tools fade. Let the hum fall still. And let your healing come without blood. The fever room. The door stayed shut. That was the rule. Once someone went in with the fever, they didn't come out. Not until it broke or carried them away. The room itself was nothing special. A cot, a basin, a window nailed shut from the outside, a Bible left open on the same page for years. It wasn't the furniture that frightened folks. It was the quiet, that long, low hush that settled over the place like snow, even in the driest part of summer. They didn't know what caused it, the fever. Some called it ague. Some said swamp air, though there were no swamps for hundreds of miles. Others blamed the well, the wind, the newcomers who arrived with bags full of silk and soft coughs they claimed were nothing. The name changed with every town. Prairie fever, cabin sickness, sun rot. But the symptoms stayed the same. Burning skin, shivering limbs, eyes that stared too hard at nothing, and lips that whispered to ghosts. The doctors didn't have answers. Some tried bleeding, said it let the fire out. Others wrapped the sick in wet sheets, trying to drown the heat. One man, a preacher turned healer, claimed prayer was enough, but left town quietly when 6 died in 1 week under his watch. Nothing worked, not reliably, not repeatably. All anyone could do was wait, and sweat and hope. There were caretakers sometimes, always women, always tired. They moved like shadows, faces half-covered, hands rough from boiling linens and wiping down strangers. They whispered to the sick, called them sweetheart and darling, no matter who they were. It helped, not the illness, but the fear. Some of the fevered died gently, heads turned to the wall, eyes closed as if listening to something just beyond the room. Others fought it, screamed, flailed, tore at their skin like it was trying to escape them. Those were the hard ones. The ones that left stains on the floorboards no matter how hard you scrubbed. Some towns tried building special cabins for the sick, left them at the edge of the settlement, near the woods or the river. A place for the fever to go, and with luck, stay. But the wind didn't care about boundaries. It carried heat and coughs, and the sharp scent of death through the fields, over fences, under doors. And when a child caught it, that's when people started praying. No one touched the bodies. Not directly. They were wrapped in sheets, rolled, buried fast. Names were sometimes carved into stone, sometimes forgotten before the dirt had even cooled. In one mining town, a man built a wagon just for the fevered, lined it with the straw, drove it from house to house, collecting the burning and the breathless. He stopped one day. No one knew why. They found him weeks later, curled in the back of his own cart, still warm, still whispering numbers that never added up to anything. You wouldn't step near that room, not even with gloves, not even with someone begging you to sit just 5 minutes and hold a hand that no longer felt real. You'd smell the sweat before you reached the door, sour and sweet, like meat left out too long. You'd hear the low murmur of someone speaking to a dream they couldn't wake from. And you'd back away. Because something in your bones would recognize the truth. This wasn't a place for the living. Not yet. But tonight, there is no fever in your veins. Your forehead is cool. Your breath comes easy. The sheets beneath you are dry, soft, untouched by the shivering that haunted so many nights before. The fever room is far away, boarded up, empty now. Just a box full of ghosts and stories no one wants to tell out loud. You are not there. You are here. Awake, alive, and clean in ways the past could never imagine. Let the fire stay unlit. Let the sickness stay forgotten. You have survived another night, and the room has no need of you.